Thank you for joining me, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between capitalism and communism as I see it. By the way, you're welcome to join the program 617-396-4830 as we're live here at YouTube and all the other subscribers. I've noticed recently commentary from some very good people, very intellectual types, who seem to claim that there really is no difference between communism and capitalism, that they're both part of a bigger conspiracy, that they're both, in the case of Dr. E. Michael Jones, they're both part of a Jewish conspiracy. They're Judaizing influences on society, and that the alternative that he holds up, let me just fix this. Yeah, that's better. The alternative that he holds up is the Catholic Church, which is neither capitalist nor communist, and which is the new Israel, the new Jerusalem. And I want to comment on that because I disagree with that vigorously. Not about the part about the Catholic Church. That's fine. That's up to Catholics to worry about. But the part about the fact that the claim that communism and capitalism are the same, I would argue that the exact opposite is true, and yet capitalism has been corrupted. And let me say what I mean. First of all, capitalism is the condition by which human beings and human societies exist and function naturally. In other words, capitalism is not an ideology. It is not a theology. It is simply an observation of nature. It is what we are. It is what we do. It is who we are. It is baked into who we are as human beings, which is to say that when the Lord God created us in his image, both men and women, he gave us free will. He gave us as imperfect beings who are both animal and spiritual. He gave us the ability to create our own lives based upon our own ability to internalize moral and ethical values and our own intelligence, our own luck, our own circumstance, our own ability to function and to learn. We are free to create our own lives and thus mold our own destinies. We then choose to engage in different activities. We choose to find a mate and have a family. We choose to develop property. Every human being does. This is part of who we are. I don't care what you say, you seek property for very rational reasons. Animals understand this. Animals seek property. I mean, try to interfere with a beaver's nest, a beaver's dam, and see that you're messing around with their property. You know, even plants understand this. They compete for sunlight, and the plant that's the stronger plant will get to the sunlight, and the weaker plant will die or be stunted. So the idea of developing property and developing a system by which we can compete for resources is natural. It's normal. It's not an ideology. This is what we do. This is part of existence. The ability to accumulate capital is normal. And we use an abstract means to do that, which is money. Every society has to have money. Even the most primitive societies have money. Money is an abstract means by which we can exchange that which we create, goods and services, so we can survive. You know, you can't go to a grocery store and offer them, if you're a farmer, offer them, a piece of fruit in exchange for other groceries. We do barter, but ultimately you need to have money, an abstract value that is agreed upon by all parties as having a set value that can be traded. And the money has to have objective, accepted values, which then brings us to the fact that we need governments. You know, I mean, the founding fathers of the United States, they recognize that government is force, and the government is in and of itself dangerous to freedom and evil, but it's a necessity. It's what you need to stamp the money. You need it to enforce the laws that allow us to own property and to create and to trade goods and services. and to do so in an orderly way so that if you have individuals or groups who violate those rights, then you have government to adjudicate those violations and come to some sort of an equitable term. So you need governments, you need organization. All of these things are normal to capitalism and to the building of a society which allows for the maximum amount of freedom for the individual to realize their life, to trade in goods and services, to control their own destiny. So capitalism is not an ideology, it is normal. Communism, on the other hand, is an ideology, and it is not normal. And yet it's also been there since the beginning of time. It is the great lie. It is the worship of the idol. It is the idea that man can be like God, that we can, create our own universe. We don't need objective morals or ethics or values that exist outside of ourselves. Because, capitalism, again, it's a recognition of existence, of reality, that the communist wants to invent new reality based upon fiat, based upon whatever they want it to be. It's a subjective thing. They want to perfect man. Man is not perfectible. We're in the image of God. We're not God. And so the communist is involved in the great lie that was told by the serpent in the Garden of Eden. You can be like gods, know good and evil, know everything, overthrow God in heaven, and everything thus becomes secular. Everything becomes man-made. Man is the center of the universe. Man decides what is true, what is real. And thus man can shape human society to advance into new stages of heightened awareness or whatever, heightened success. The theory of evolution completely is consonant with the communist idea, but that's another subject. The point is that this idea that we're not beings who are created in the image and we're sovereign over our own lives, which is the capitalist idea and which is the normal idea. The idea of the communists is that we're just transient entities that could be molded and shaped by people who have some kind of an enlightened awareness. In fact, this is why communism is completely intertwined with the occult, because that's what the occult is, developing a super consciousness that allows societies and individuals to reshape themselves, to shapeshift into something different, something bigger, something better, or something worse, whatever the case may be. And so the communist needs to be involved in usurping the natural rights of people, the right to own property being the most essential, but also the right to trade goods and services, the right to trade ideas, and replace that with control by an authority that acts as an agent of change. They even use the word change agent, toward moving toward this utopia that they have a fuzzy idea about. They call communism, or it's been called other names, where everyone becomes de facto equal. Everyone becomes the same. There's no more inequity. In other words, things that make us not equal, that make us different, things like love, family, commitment, personal relationship, property, the right to trade goods and services, knowledge, these things that all make us unequal because we all have different capacities and we're all in different situations. All of that for the communists is abolished. And you have absolute equality. In other words, you have a world that looks more like an ant colony. Everyone is functioning and doing whatever job they're skilled at to advance the society, but nobody is different. Nobody has any autonomy. This is why the communists admire the Greek philosopher Plato in his book, The Republic, because the Republic is a proto-communist state where you have the people who the government decides whether they'll be soldiers, merchants, different professions, farmers, whatever they need, and then they put people in those paths. And when the child is born, they decide whether the child will live or die based upon whether they think they're going to serve the interests of the state. And if they're not seen as serving such interest, they're left out on the hillside to die, which is something that's so barbaric that even the Romans got rid of that. Of course, it's now coming back with the Democratic Party and their desire to legalize infanticide. That's another subject. The point is that the communist idea is the exact opposite of the capitalist idea. It is a completely unnatural, completely false idea. that people are fooled into believing because they engage in every generation in this marketing campaign that they're somehow making the world better, that they're utopian, and that they're going to make everybody equal, and that if you don't have what your neighbor has, you somehow have a right to it because you want it. So you don't have to do anything for it. You just are entitled to it. So that brings up the question, which is, what has happened to capitalism? Why is capitalism criticized in this way? Why is it, negative? What is negative about it? Well, capitalism is, the victim of its own nature. Because we are imperfect beings, we do imperfect things. And so thus you have imperfect ideas that are implemented within the context of capitalism. And I would trace the main setback to the development of capitalism, which is something that, while it's natural, it's been a struggle for mankind to achieve it, since in our more primitive stages, we were more communistic. I think that Frederick Engels, Karl Marx's capitalist financier and friend, got into this in a booklet that he wrote where he talked about primitive socialism, primitive ownership. That is what primitive societies were about. They did not develop the sense of individual awareness, that we're sovereign individuals under God, that we are responsible for creating our own lives and our own successes and failures. And by this means, we have a maximum ability to control our destiny. That this was not the condition of ancient man. And that, in fact, the entire Jewish experience, the children of Israel breaking away from slavery, worshiping a god rather than idols and pagan gods, getting the law at Sinai, trying to create a commonwealth in Canaan. These are all represented a striving forth and the development of the sovereignty of the individual, under God, and a rejection of these man-made communistic systems where everyone would be collectivized and controlled by this so-called enlightened elites who were the movers behind the idol throne. And so what happened in the course of the development was ideas that were introduced by Adam Smith and some others, who was generally revered as one of the fathers of modern capitalism, and in many ways he was. But he introduced certain tendencies that I think corrupted our understanding of capitalism. And that is that he removed the moral and ethical context by which capitalism really can only thrive in the sense of actually improving the lives of citizens and advancing human civilization. He removed those things by removing capitalism from religion. He removed those things by removing capitalism from even secular understanding of local community control and environmental awareness. And, the fact that you own a piece of property doesn't mean that you're a feudal king. You have to work with other people who also own property. So your right to own a property doesn't mean you can build a garbage dump in your backyard, because that's going to affect your neighbor's property. And the community has a certain say generally in what sort of properties ought to exist in their boundaries, and you have a say in challenging those things through local elected government. That's in a sense the capitalist ideal, that you have maximum freedom, but it's not anarchy. It is freedom within the context of, number one, moral and ethical laws, and in the West we derive them from the Judeo-Christian code. And secondly, the idea that local government and, based on moral and ethical precepts and law, exists in such a way that it regulates and adjudicates conflict that inevitably exists and emerges as a result of competition. Well, Adam Smith stripped those things away in his idea of the hidden hand of the market. And he created this idea that economics was somehow to be separated from these other factors, that it was to be seen as a separate science, if you will. When in fact economics, the word economics comes from economia, which is the Greek word for home. That's what economics is. It's taking a look at the welfare of the home, and that's not just their financial welfare and their budget, but it's also looking at their morals and their ethics and their production and their desires and their tastes and their interests and all of the factors that make up the life of the home, of the family. Well, Smith kind of removed all of those other aspects from economics, and he boiled it down to strictly a matter of money and finance. Thus, you had a gradual removal, and I'm not sure that Smith did this consciously, but you had a removal of moral and ethical values and of community values that would serve as a natural restraint to the more unbridled and the negative side of capitalism that's also a reflection of human nature, because we all have that. And so you started down the road toward this false idea of unbridled capitalism. And this is why Karl Marx embraced Adam Smith, because he could see in Smith a tool for the advancement of communism. Because once you remove a people from their moral and ethical moorings and from their ability to have a say in their local communities and even in their governments, then and everything becomes just the free market and unbridled capitalism, then you have a recipe for anarchy and you have a recipe for world control in the hands of the very wealthy, the unelected people. Now, that's where you end up with this international hierarchy of extremely wealthy people, the top maybe 1% in the world, who have lost touch with the fact that at some point in their lives, or maybe in their parents' life, if they inherited, somebody had to earn a buck, at some point. And instead they become pro-communist. They become this idea that somehow they have a sense of noblesse oblige. They want to control the world for its own good and change mankind literally through force or through subterfuge and deception. And so they're no longer really operating as capitalists. I mean, they are in that they're doing whatever they want to do. They've realized their own lives. But what they're advocating runs contrary to capitalism in its truest form, which is as a natural and normal means of living that is restrained by the moral and ethical precepts of the Torah and by the local regional governments which we set up to ensure that that conflicts and competition are kept adjudicated in a fair way. So thus you have this ingathering of wealth in the hands of a very few on an international level, and that these very same people are the creators of, the backers of, and that they populate the far left and the communist enterprise. So that's why I think there's a confusion between the difference between communism and capitalism, which is quite real, and the fact that capitalists have populated the capitalist idea and have used it to move the world more toward communism with them in charge. It's creating a confusion. And I think that I feel incumbent, and I hope others do as well, to try to identify the difference between communism and capitalism, to not only call out the communists as people who are trying to usurp our individual freedom and who are on the wrong side of reality, but to especially call out the so-called capitalists who are their enablers, backers, enforcers, and who benefit from them in a way that is contrary to the capitalist ideal of individuals competing in an open market. Anyway, so that's what I see as the difference between communism and capitalism, which I think is quite stark. And I want to thank you for joining me, Charles Moscowitz. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great afternoon.